Codex Alimentarius.
Ah, yes, the Codex.
So we're going to do it. We're going to uncover how this global organization dedicated to food standards even came to be.
I think listeners will be surprised by how far back this goes.
Right, like way back.
Yeah.
Ancient civilizations and all that.
Hmm.
Did you know food laws even existed in ancient Greece and Rome?
Oh, yeah. The desire for safe and pure food, it's not new at all.
So let's rewind the clock a bit. What kind of systems did ancient civilizations have in place?
Well, take ancient Athens. They had, systems to inspect their beer and wine. Imagine that, beer inspectors back in the day.
Wow, dedicated beer inspectors. And in Rome?
They took it up a notch. Rome had a very, how do I put it, a really structured state food control system.
I guess everyone wants to make sure their wine is legit, huh?
It goes beyond just, wanting a good drink. It really all boils down to trust, right? From the earliest organized societies, leaders knew they had to protect people from, well, getting tricked with their food or even getting sick.
It's about peace of mind, knowing what you're eating is safe. And it wasn't just the Greeks and Romans, right? Medieval Europe had a whole set of laws, too.
Oh, absolutely. They had laws for everything. Eggs, sausages, staples like cheese, even bread.
It makes you wonder, are any of those ancient laws still around?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, some things just, stand the test of time.
Totally. But I bet things got a whole lot more complicated once the Industrial Revolution hit, right?
You said it. The way we produced and consumed food changed drastically.
So in terms of food laws, what shifted in this period?
Well, the second half of the 19th century saw the development of the first, I guess you could call them modern food laws and food control systems.
What were they mainly focused on? Was it just expanding on those old laws, or was it something totally new?
A bit of both. A big focus was on preventing what they called adulteration, like watering down milk to cheat people or using harmful chemicals.
Right, so protecting consumers from shady practices.
Exactly. It was about making sure what you buy is actually what it says it is.
So with industrialization and mass production, the concept of purity had to evolve as well, right?
Absolutely. And with that came food chemistry. Suddenly, you could analyze the chemical composition of food to determine its purity.
It's not just about how it looks or tastes anymore. You need science to back it up.
You got it. But then, more challenges pop up. Scientists started understanding the effects of industrial chemicals on food. That meant, well, the definition of adulteration had to broaden.
Okay, so things are getting more complex. I'm guessing this is about the time international trade starts throwing a wrench into things.
Exactly. Each country starts developing its own approach to food standards, and, well, you can imagine what happens next.
Chaos, confusion, complete lack of consistency.
Pretty much. It was a patchwork of different rules and regulations. It worked fine if you were just eating locally, but with global trade expanding, it became a big obstacle.
Makes sense. It's like trying to fit puzzle pieces from completely different sets together.
A perfect analogy. And this is where these trade associations step in. They realized everyone needed to be on the same page. Take the International Dairy Federation, the IDF, they pushed for harmonization of standards.
They knew that to trade safely and fairly, everyone needed to play by the same rules.
Absolutely. Consistent quality and safety, that was the goal.
Smart move. And then comes World War II, which I'm guessing just threw the whole system into disarray, right?
It was devastating, especially in Europe. There were food shortages everywhere. Rebuilding and, well, just feeding people became top priority. It put a huge spotlight on food security.
So food security goes from a national issue to this global concern.
It became intertwined with global stability and peace. This is what led to the creation of the Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, in 1943. Their mission was to improve agriculture, increase food production, and, set some international standards for trade.
So the FAO comes onto the scene, and working with the World Health Organization, or WHO, they start tackling this massive issue of food standards.
Yeah. But even with these organizations in place, it was still a huge undertaking. There were still a lot of inconsistencies.
In the early 50s, was there a specific moment that highlighted these issues?
Well, in 1950, a report was published by the FAO and the WHO. It basically outlined all the problems, the inconsistencies, the conflicting regulations, the whole 9 yards. They stressed the need for better harmonization.
So what were some of the biggest hurdles at that point? Was there one issue in particular that was causing major headaches?
One of the big ones was the growing use of food additives. Different countries had wildly different rules for controlling them, which obviously created problems for international trade.
And I'm guessing it raised concerns about the safety of these additives, right? If everyone's doing their own thing, there is no guarantee of consistency.
Exactly. It was a real mess. So, to address this, they established the Joint FAO Expert Committee on Food Additives, or JECFA, in 1955. This was a big step towards recognizing that food safety wasn't just about preventing fraud. It was about understanding the potential long-term health risks of what we were putting into our food.
Okay, so now we're starting to see the foundation for Codex Alimentarius being laid.
Right.
This idea that we need a global framework for food standards.
You're getting there.
Yeah.
While JCFA focused on additives, there were other efforts happening too. In Latin America, there was Carlos Grau pushing for a regional food code. And in Europe, Hans Frenzel was advocating for a Europe-wide Codex Alimentarius.
Wait, hold on. A Europe-wide Codex Alimentarius, was that based on something specific?
He actually modeled it after it had a very long name, the Codex Alimentarius Austriacus. It was essentially a collection of food standards from the, believe it or not, Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Wow. So even back then, they had this idea of standardizing food safety. It's amazing to think that these old ideas are still relevant today.
Pretty impressive, right? But Europe, even with this historical precedent, they had a tough time reaching a consensus.
So they formed a council, right? The
Yeah.
Council of the Codex Alimentarius Europius?
Yep. It was formed in 1958, but it ran into roadblocks. Funding was one problem, and then there were, disagreements on some of the more controversial standards.
Makes sense. Getting everyone on the same page is never easy. So at this point, it seems like the world was ready for a truly global effort. But who is going to step up and take the lead?
Well, the FAO was really proactive on this front. By the early 60s, they were working with tons of organizations, the WHO, the ECE, the OECD, even that European Codex Council we just talked about. They knew this international program was necessary, and they were determined to make it happen.
That's great to hear. So this is where things really start to gain momentum, right?
Yep. It all culminated in a crucial resolution passed by the FAO conference in November 1961. They formally established the Codex Alimentarius Commission. It was a big moment, a clear signal that the world was ready to get serious about food standards.
Okay, we're finally on the verge of the birth of Codex Alimentarius as we know it. But something tells me it wasn't all smooth sailing from there.
Yeah, I can imagine. Bringing together so many different countries with their own ideas about food safety, it must have been pretty challenging.
It definitely wasn't easy. There were a lot of moving parts. But one of the key moments was the 1962 Joint FAO-WHO Food Standards Conference in Geneva.
So this is where it all becomes official. The Codex Alimentarius Commission is born.
Exactly. This conference was all about solidifying their collaboration and formally establishing the commission. They wanted to create a solid framework to run the joint FAO-WHO Food Standards Program.
Okay, so it's official. The commission is ready to tackle this massive task. But where did they even begin? I mean, did they start completely from scratch, or was there some groundwork already in place? Well, thankfully, they didn't have to reinvent the wheel entirely. They were smart about it. They incorporated a lot of the existing work that had already been done. Things like the Latin American Código, the European Codex Council, and even some of the standards that had already been developed for specific products like milk and fresh produce.
Makes sense. It's always better to build on what's already working, right?
Absolutely. It's all about efficiency and collaboration.
So we've got the commission, they've got a plan, they're ready to roll. When did they actually get down to business? When was their first official meeting?
The first session of the Codex Alimentarius Commission took place in Rome in October of 1963.
Wow, 1963. Can you imagine being a fly on the wall at that first meeting? Delegates from 30 countries all trying to agree on international food standards. It must have been a pretty intense experience.
I'm sure there were some lively debates, but that's what's so great about Codex. It creates this forum where everyone can come together, share their perspectives, and work towards a common goal.
Finding common ground, even when it comes to food. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's been going strong for over 6 decades now, which is pretty incredible.
It really is remarkable, and it's grown so much since then. We started with 30 member countries back in '63. Now there are 151. That's over 97% of the world's population represented by Codex.
And their budget has grown too, right? It's a testament to how seriously the world takes food safety.
Absolutely. They started with very limited resources, but now their budget is over $5 million US. It shows how committed they are to this mission.
From humble beginnings to this global powerhouse, that's quite a journey. But with that kind of growth, I imagine they've had to adapt and evolve over the years to meet the changing needs of all those member countries.
You're right. They've had to be very strategic about their structure and how they operate. For example, they've established regional coordinating committees. It helps address challenges specific to certain regions of the world. And they've also created new committees to focus on new and emerging issues as they arise.
Makes sense. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach when you're dealing with the entire world. Could you give us an example of what some of these specialized committees focus on?
Sure. Think about pesticide residues. It's a huge issue, right? You've got food that might be grown in one country, processed in another, and consumed in a third. Figuring out safe levels for everyone involved, well, that's a complex task. But that's exactly the kind of challenge that a Codex committee would tackle.
Yeah, I can see how having experts focused on specific issues like that would be crucial. So they've clearly grown a lot, they've adapted, they've expanded their scope. But the big question is, has Codex actually achieved what it set out to do? Back in 1962, did they envision this level of impact? I mean, is it just a bunch of meetings and paperwork, or is it truly shaping how food is produced and treated globally?
I think they've actually surpassed what they initially imagined. Codex has truly become the coordinated mechanism for developing food standards worldwide. There's no other international or regional body working on food standards that operates outside the Codex framework. They've set the gold standards, so to speak.
That's impressive. So they're not just setting standards, they're also setting the framework for how those standards are developed and implemented. It's pretty powerful.
And the scope of their work is incredible. They've published hundreds of food standards, codes of practice, guidelines, you name it. It's all compiled in what they call the Codex Alimentarius.
And this Codex Alimentarius, it's not some secret document, right? Anyone can access it.
Exactly. It's publicly available. They want this information to be accessible to everyone.
That's great. Transparency is key when it comes to something as important as food safety. But I have to admit, thinking about all these standards and regulations, it can feel a bit, well,
Dry.
I get it. It's not exactly the most exciting topic for everyone, right? But it's crucial. So how does Codex make sure that all this work stays relevant and impactful? I mean, the world is constantly changing, and the food industry is no exception. How do they keep up?
It's definitely a challenge, but they're constantly adapting. We have new technologies emerging all the time, scientific discoveries are happening every day, and consumer preferences are always evolving. Codex has to be proactive and stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not enough to just react to what's happening. They have to anticipate what's coming next.
Exactly. And that's exactly what they did in 1991. The joint FAO-WHO Conference on Food Standards basically issued a new set of challenges for Codex. They recognized all the amazing work that had been done, but they said, okay, now we need you to be the leading provider of science-based international food standards.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
But I remember you mentioned new trade agreements earlier. I'm sensing a connection here. Was this new challenge from the FAO and WHO tied to those agreements?
You're spot on. The Uruguay Round Agreements of 1995, they included some really important provisions. They covered things like sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which are basically all about protecting human, animal, and plant life and health. And they also covered technical barriers to trade.
Technical barriers to trade. So basically rules and regulations that could be used unfairly to restrict trade.
You got it. The Uruguay Round Agreements wanted to ensure a level playing field, and they decided that Codex standards would be the benchmark. They'd be used to determine if a country's food regulations were actually scientifically justified or if they were just protectionist measures disguised as safety protocols.
That's pretty brilliant. It gives Codex real authority.
Yeah.
Their standards aren't just suggestions anymore. They're the basis for international trade agreements.
Yeah.
Talk about impactful.
Exactly. It was a major turning point for Codex. Suddenly, their work had even more weight and relevance in the global marketplace. It solidified their role as the go-to organization for food standards.
It's amazing to think about it, isn't it? We've come such a long way. From ancient beer inspections to a global organization shaping the future of food safety and trade, it's an incredible journey.
It really is, and it's a testament to human ingenuity and collaboration. We've recognized this fundamental need to ensure the safety and quality of our food, and we've continually strived to improve our systems over centuries.
It makes you wonder what's next for Codex. I mean, we've talked about the past and the present, but what does the future hold? What new challenges are on the horizon? Well, the future of food, that's a big question. I mean, there's so many factors at play these days. Where do you even begin to unpack all that?
You're right. It's a complex landscape, but if I had to point to one area that's going to demand more and more attention, it's sustainability.
Sustainability, yeah, it's a word we hear everywhere these days. But what does it actually mean in the context of Codex and food standards?
It's about recognizing that food isn't just about, what's on our plates. It's about the entire system. From farm to fork, consumers are becoming way more aware of the impact their food choices have on the planet, on society, the whole picture.
So it's not just about whether the food itself is safe, it's about how it's produced, right?
Hmm.
The environmental impact, the social impact, all of that.
Exactly. People want food that's safe, nutritious, but also, ethically produced.
Yeah.
They're thinking about things like deforestation, water usage, fair labor practices, the whole nine yards.
Yeah, those are huge issues. And honestly, they can feel a bit overwhelming. How can Codex even begin to address all of that? I mean, it's a global organization focused on food standards.
Yeah.
Can they really tackle these massive systemic problems?
Well, it's definitely a challenge, but I think Codex is uniquely positioned to, bring everyone to the table.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, they can get producers, consumers, governments, scientists, everyone involved in the conversation. It's about finding solutions that work for all stakeholders, not just one group.
I see what you mean. Finding that balance, that common ground, it's going to be even more important as new food technologies come into play.
Oh, absolutely. That's another huge challenge on the horizon. We're already seeing it with GMOs, lab-grown meat, all these new innovations. The debates can get pretty heated.
Yeah, there's a lot of passion on both sides of those issues.
And Codex will play a crucial role in, establishing those science-based standards for safety and responsible use of these technologies.
So it's about navigating those choppy waters, finding that sweet spot between, encouraging innovation and making sure things are done safely and responsibly.
Right. And keeping in mind that different countries have different values and perspectives on these issues, there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
It sounds like those meetings could get pretty interesting. Imagine scientists, policymakers, all these experts from all over the world, each with their own opinions and priorities, trying to come to some kind of consensus. Must be a lot of give and take.
I'm sure it can get intense, but hey, that's the nature of diplomacy, right? And so far, Codex has a pretty good track record of finding workable solutions, even when the issues are complex.
Okay, so we've got sustainability and food tech. Those are two big ones. Anything else on your Codex radar?
Well, we can't forget about the, how do I put it, the elephant in the room.
Climate change.
Climate change. It's already impacting the global food system. We're seeing extreme weather events, shifting growing seasons, water scarcity, all these challenges that are only going to intensify in the coming years.
So how does Codex fit into that?
It's about helping countries adapt,
Yeah.
building more resilient food systems. We need to be thinking about things like drought-resistant crops, new food preservation methods, even reducing food waste. These are all areas where Codex can contribute.
It's a lot to take on.
Hmm.
But I guess when you think about it, the mission of Codex, ensuring a safe and sustainable food supply for everyone, it's never been more relevant.
It's a mission that's only going to become more critical as we move forward. And it's a mission that requires global cooperation and a commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone.
It's inspiring to think about, really. We've talked about the long history of food standards, all the way from ancient times to the present. It shows this inherent human desire to make sure the food we eat is safe and good.
I agree. It's a basic human need, right? And it's something we've been striving for centuries. And Codex is carrying that torch forward.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into Codex Alimentarius.
Bye.
I have to admit, I learned a ton. Before we started, I had no idea food standards had such a rich and fascinating history.
It's a reminder that even the things we might take for granted, they often have these amazing stories behind them. Stories of innovation, collaboration, and just, human ingenuity.
And those stories are still being written. It's exciting to think about the role Codex will continue to play in the future of food. It's a global effort, a collective endeavor. It's a story we're all part of.
I think that's the perfect way to put it. What do you think, listener? What are your thoughts on Codex? How do you see it evolving to meet the challenges of the 21st century? We'd love to hear your perspectives. You can find some great resources in our show notes if you want to learn more. And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.